Hey guys. So, welcome to week 4 of the fall semester. It feels like it has been very short and very long all at the same time. I don't know about you guys. So I'm making this video and we're going to go through a couple things today to make sure you understand what work-based learning is and what career and technical education is in general, and how we work within the confines of what we have to make things better for students. What I realized in my in-person class, is that we needed to start from scratch and say, okay, what is a graduation plan? What are our endorsements? What are all of these things, these words we use in education, that we may not know? Because you guys go through the system, but it is very different when you get on this side of it. So the first thing we're going to do is talk about how you actually graduate from high school in Texas, and then what we do with that once we get to the college level. So that's our first goal for today. And the second goal for this week and possibly next week too is to dig into the history and philosophy of career and technical education, how it started, what it came from, and then where it's going from here into the future. Because that is really essential when we talk about work-based learning. That is kind of the bread and butter of what we do, and everything stems from some laws that happened a fairly long time ago. So that's what we're going to talk about in this video. I might break it up into 2 or 3 videos just to make them all a little bit shorter. But I think that this is going to help you get the foundations of everything that you need to know in order to teach work-based learning and career prep classes in the future. Because that's really our goal, is to make sure you know how to do those things. So just a couple quick notes while we are kind of working through this process. Um, there are 2 major things that you need to be working towards at this point. One of them is your observations of a teacher, either in your school or around you, or wherever you are. So your observations of a family and consumer sciences teacher. And then the second thing is the TEA, work-based learning course. Technically, this class that you're taking counts as learning all of those things, but sometimes TEA doesn't recognize that. So we like to get you the actual credential from TEA as well. So I'm going to put a link in your Canvas class for you guys to start working on that um, work-based learning course. It is through Canvas and TEA, so it may look a little funky. It may look a lot like what we're doing here, but it will help you in understanding how we get, like I said, from here to where we are, and then you'll be certified to teach those work-based learning classes. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how you graduate from high school here in Texas. Hopefully you know the nuts and bolts of that, but it gets really confusing sometimes, and we want to make sure that you understand how to help your students in the best way possible. So let me pull up the PowerPoint, which hopefully you can see. It's called Career Plus Clusters, Pathways, and Other Things, because we're going to talk about clusters, pathways, and all the other things that go along with that. So here in Texas, we have Texas graduation requirements, which changed in 2013. So I think both of you graduated from high school after 2013. However, if you didn't, Christina, this may be more for you. Um, you may have had some different graduation requirements. So in Texas right now, the foundation high school graduation requirements were signed into law in 2013. It's been that default graduation program for all students entering high school since the 2014-2015 school year. So it requires students to have 22 credits when they graduate from high school. Now do the math on that. That's actually less than 6 credits per school year, if you actually do the math on that. But what they do is you get the endorsements on top of that, so you have a few more credits when you graduate. So that requires 4 English language arts credits, 3 math credits, 3 science, 3 social studies, 2 credits of languages other than English, 1 physical education credit, 1 fine arts credit, and 5 electives. And those electives actually help you on your path to fulfilling some other graduation requirements. So as you notice in these graduation requirements, there are actually some very specific things that students have to do, including algebra and geometry. You have to do biology or the equivalent of that in an AP Bio or an International Baccalaureate biology class. And then one has to be a lab-based science. So chemistry, physics, anatomy and physiology, things like that. And then this is the one I thought was funny. You have to take US history since 1877 in Texas. So if anyone knows why 1877 is that mark, please let me know. I might Google it later. Okay, so these are your basic graduation requirements for students here in Texas. Then we have other graduation requirements that have kind of been added on throughout the years. So the first of those is to get all those foundation high school program requirements. The second is to pass all the STAR tests, and all of those other tests that you may have to take. And then the third is to demonstrate proficiency as determined by the school district, in delivering verbal messages, nonverbal behaviors, and a whole host of other things. So that very long list of things, including being able to do personal and professional presentation. So always something to keep in mind, especially if you're going to be doing FCCLA or some other kind of student organization in the future. The other thing that actually happened starting with the 2022 school year is that in order to graduate from high school, every student has to either fill out a it's FAFSA, can never say it right, or a TASPA. So that is the federal application for financial aid or the Texas application for financial aid. And those things actually help students get free money if you need it to go to school. So there's a catch to everything, right? So there's some caveats to this that if you don't want to fill out that, you can actually do a few things, some paperwork your parents can do in order to not have to do those things. But for me personally, I'm like, why wouldn't you see if you can get free money? So the other things you need to do are complete requirements for at least 1 endorsement. And then if you want a distinguished level graduation, so like a little seal on your diploma, you complete the foundation program and then you get at least 1 endorsement. So endorsements are what we're going to talk about next. This is something that was created on around with this graduation plan, so 2014, 2015. And it seems complicated, and at the same time, it is not as complicated as it seems. So endorsements are kind of add-on little things where you have a plan and you say, okay, I'm going to take these courses, and this is going to help me on the path to a career, hopefully. So you can earn an endorsement by taking 26 or more credits, which includes a 4th math credit, a 4th science credit, and 2 additional elective courses. So you probably have an endorsement, maybe depending on where you graduated from, you may have multiple endorsements or you may have just one. In very small schools, most schools have the multidisciplinary endorsement because they are not able to offer all of the coursework necessary for some of these other endorsements. So your endorsement options are STEM, business and industry, public service, arts and humanities, and multidisciplinary. Out of those, we actually in family and consumer sciences fit into 4 out of the 5. So the only one we really don't fit into is, or none of our classes fit into, is that arts and humanities, because the arts and humanities endorsement is more like if you were in choir and band and the visual and performing arts. So we don't have many classes that deal with that visual and performing arts. If you click on this link, I will put this PowerPoint up for you. It tells you a lot more about endorsements and how you can use them and the specific coursework that is involved in actually getting an endorsement. But you guys are smart, you can read it, right? You're both grad students. So then we move on to career clusters. So our career clusters are interesting, and they've changed a little over the last few years. So there is a video linked right here to tell you a little bit more about the career cluster framework and what it is, how it has evolved over the last 2 years. I'm also going to talk about it. But if you want to click on that video, you can. For the sake of this not being too long, I'm going to skip over it, but please watch it so that you can learn a little bit more about what we've done to change the career clusters over the years. So the career clusters began in 1996 as something called the Building Linkages Initiative. So what they wanted to do was establish a link between educational agencies, secondary and post-secondary institutions, employers, industry groups, other stakeholders, federal agencies, anyone, to help students actually move from secondary to from like middle school and high school to either a university or some other kind of post-secondary learning where they can get some kind of credential. So the goal was to create that framework for the broad career clusters that prepare students to transition successfully. Because as we saw, starting the late 90s, early 2000s, students weren't transitioning quite the same way. There's a whole lot of reasons for that, but this was one way that the federal government actually tried to combat some of that. So it's a collaborative effort between the Department of Education, the Office of Vocational and Adult Education, the National School to Work Office, and the National Skills Standards Board. So when this was first formulated, there were 16 career clusters, and you can see all of them right here. I'm not going to read them to you, but you can see that if you've not learned anything about career clusters, that family and consumer sciences actually does not have its own cluster. We are in 5 separate ones, our coursework is, in 5 of those separate clusters, because we are so interdisciplinary in nature. So we actually fit into the arts, AV, and technology, architecture and construction, education and training, hospitality and tourism, and human services clusters. And this is actually the old iteration of these clusters. We have some new ones that have just been developed that I'll talk about in just a minute. So each cluster included 4 groups of things people would need to know and be able to do to demonstrate competence within a career pathway. So the real goal of these clusters was to say, okay, what do we need to know and what do we need to be able to do in order to be successful in the future in a career? So what do our students who want to be electricians need to know and be able to do in order to be successful? Or who want to be chefs or want to work in some other part of construction or want to be nurses. Like, what do we need to know and what do we need to do? So the 4 things that they needed were foundational academic expectations. So, you know, what are the actual academic rigor. We also want the essential knowledge and skills, the cluster knowledge and skills, and then the pathway knowledge and skills. So your essential knowledge and skills is just those things you need to know. The cluster would be, let's say, what you need to know about human services. And then the pathway knowledge and skills would be what you specifically might want to need to know about being an early childhood educator. So those four things needed to be in all of those clusters. It included a lot of stuff. So recently, over the last 2 to 3 years, a new framework has been developed with massive input from industry partners and CTE professionals. And I will tell you, I have some feelings about the new cluster and how it came about, but we will keep those to the side. So this was designed to be a bridge between education and work and truly reflects their interdisciplinary nature of work and strives to remove those silos that we're sometimes in across the career clusters. So there's also language that's been updated and groupings to better bridge the organization of work with education. So sometimes we know that what we do in a job doesn't quite translate to what we learn, and vice versa. So it includes modern sectors, skills, and approaches from the entire world of work while providing flexibility for the future and the needs of each state. So one of the things that we need to know about the clusters and the framework is that they are, although this is a national push, the clusters in the framework can still be state specific. And we'll talk about that more in just a minute. So this is what the framework currently looks like. It's at careertech.org/career clusters. This should be a link on here for you. So what you'll see is they have created the words escaped me, a wheel of options for students and adults alike, actually. So in the very middle of that wheel, we have our career ready practices, which we all teach and hope students learn by the time they get out of high school. And then that next circle, that darkest shade of those colors, is our cluster subgroupings. Oh, cluster groupings, apologies. So those are our very broad spectrum groupings of these things. So in this we have, and I know it's tiny, so make sure you actually click on the link and go look at this on a much bigger scale. So we have connecting and supporting success. We have caring for communities. We have cultivating resources. We have building and moving, creating and experiencing, and investing in the future. So a lot of what we do now in family and consumer sciences actually fits into the caring for communities section. And then also the creating and experiencing, if we kind of want to say, this is kind of where we fit into these clusters or the cluster groupings. So then when we look at the actual clusters, you can see that there's actually 14 of them now. However, 3 of them are what they call cross-cutting clusters, and those are the ones that are in purple. We'll talk about those in just a second. So those are our clusters, and then we have our subclusters, which are what we used to call pathways, or programs of studying, or a whole lot of different things, mostly pathways. So these are the actual specific careers that you could go into in each of those little categories. So if you look at where it says education, so we look at caring for communities and then look at education, and then it tells you you could be in early childhood, you could look at early childhood development, education and administrative leadership, learner support, teaching, training, and facilitation. So those are areas that you can go into that are much more specific to that cluster. So that's why they call them subclusters. So then the purple is our cross-cutting themes. These are 3 areas where the people who created this model said, okay, all of these things actually fit into all of the other clusters. So you'll see one of them is management and entrepreneurship. if you think about that broadly, you can have an element of entrepreneurship in every single one of the other clusters. So we think about arts, entertainment, and design and how entrepreneurship fits into that. Or we think about agriculture and how it fits into that. That's why those are kind of in a different vein of thinking. So those three are management and entrepreneurship, digital technology, and then marketing and sales. Because like I said, all three of those areas, those sections, actually fit into all of the other clusters. Now, when these new clusters were being created, we actually advocated for family and consumer sciences being part of its either own cluster or part of those cross-cutting clusters as well. However, that was met with some resistance. And so you'll see this is the final, like polished model of the career clusters. And you see at the bottom, it says pathways to college and career readiness. So I'm sure you have some questions. Please ask them. So I'm going to put up a discussion board for you guys to ask some questions about these career clusters and the pathways and the subclusters and what you may need to ask, what you may need to know on like a deeper level about this. So, like I said, these are the 14 clusters. And again, you can read them. You guys are both working on your master's degree now with this class. So, there's 14 instead of 16. And then those three in pink are the ones that are the cross-cutting clusters. Okay, so subclusters, we already talked about these as well. Within each cluster, there's subclusters. They used to be called pathways, but that was really confusing. I think subclusters is confusing as well. But that's what we got. There's 72 in total at the national level. And then in Texas and in any other state, you can actually choose to create more of them as well. So in creating these clusters and pathways, what we want to do is make sure that students and adults have the opportunity to move seamlessly into a career pathway and then move in and out of that pathway as they may need to. So what you'll see is that we really want to focus on having stackable credentials that help people over their lifetime. So we start that secondary to post-secondary programs of study, which we'll talk about in just a minute. I keep saying that a lot, but it's true. And then we have our adult career pathways on the bottom. So that top part is actually our more traditional student who moves from high school on to college or some other kind of post-secondary education, and then on to the workforce. So the outcomes are always, we want financially sustainable, aligned career pathways and systems for youth and adults. So making sure it's things that are going to be viable for the next 20 to 30 years. We also want an increased number of skilled workers with credentials of value in the labor market. So, the joke that everyone says, people went to college to do underwater basket weaving. That's not really something that, first of all, you can do, but second of all, it's not something that is really a sustainable thing in the labor market. So we also want to have greater cost efficiencies by reducing the duplication of services, because how frustrated are you when you learn something in one place and then you go somewhere else and you have to learn it again and you've paid for it both times? I'm sure that's something that's happened within the college sphere for both of you. So we want to make sure that there's multiple entry and exit points, especially for adults, to ensure that it's not taking them forever to get those new credentials that they may need. So this is a video explaining the programs of study. So what I want you to do is watch this. However, if you're not a good visual auditory learner, like videos are sometimes hard for me. I'm actually gonna explain it on the next slide as well. So, Perkins 5. So I said those words, but do you know what those words mean? I'll explain them in another video. Perkins 5 asks states to create programs of study, which help students attain post-secondary degree or industry recognized credential so that they are good to go out into the workforce. So there's 6 things that they have to be able to do. At minimum, there's a coordinated, non-duplicative sequence of academic and technical content. So that means stuff that builds on each other, we scaffold instead of duplicating what we're learning. And we want to do that at both the secondary and post-secondary level. So we want to incorporate challenging, state identified academic standards, address academic and technical knowledge, and employability skills, which is what we do a lot in FCS. We want to align to the needs of industries in the state, region, tribal community, or local area. We'll talk about that some more as well, because that can be different based on what area of the country you're in, or even what area of the state you're in. We also want these course sequences to progress in content specificity. So get a little bit harder, a little bit more specific over the course of time. So that's like when you have culinary 1 and you're learning knife skills, and then in culinary 2, you're learning much harder things that build on each other. Again, we want those multiple entry and exit points that allow for credentialing. And then we want it to culminate in the attainment of recognized post-secondary credentials. So making sure that there's some kind of credential that says we've done it. So the programs of study in Texas are somewhat interesting. I think because this video is already over 20 minutes long, I'm going to stop it here so that we can actually work through the programs of study together. So next video, I hope this was informative and you learned a little bit more about how to help our students graduate. And we will talk about programs of study and pathways and all of those other fun things that are Texas specific in our next video.